Hello, everyone. Welcome to CMO Therapy, a podcast that's hopefully going to help you navigate your way through your marketing journey. Because let me tell you, I get it. Being a marketing leader is no walk in the park. Each episode, we dive headfirst into the world of B2B marketing, where uncertainty, tight budgets, and fierce competition are just the beginning of the rollercoaster ride. But guess what? You're not alone in this. Why go solo when you can tap into the powerhouse of insights from some of the most awesome marketing leaders in the game? And look, the title might include the word therapy, but we are not just talking about challenges here. We're tackling them head on. So join us as we deep dive into the nitty gritty, share our war stories, and unlock secret strategies. Get ready for a no holds barred conversation because sometimes I have no filter. So if you're a chief marketing officer, a marketing lead, or just someone looking to up their marketing game, then I am so glad that you're here with us today. And I am also very glad to have the very lovely Andrea here with me today. Hello, Andrea. Can you please give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm Andrea Linehan. I am from Ireland, and this is where I'm based. Before that, I had spent almost 10 years in the Middle East, where I cut my teeth in marketing. But for the last 10 years, I've been a CMO, predominantly in the fintech space.
Thank you very much. So, the title of today's episode that we agreed on was When Marketing Meets Finance, How to Speak CFO, which when I heard the marketing meets finance, it conjures up that kind of image of that old When Harry Met Sally movie. And hopefully, we're not going to go down that path. I mean, but I think the title pretty much explains what we're going to dig into here. So let's just jump straight in. So when you're in those budget meetings, I love those budget meetings. When you're in those budget meetings and the CFO is all about the numbers, how do you manage that kind of pressure really to justify your marketing spend is kind of what I'm going to hit you with first of all, especially when in today's world, we're under so much pressure to kind of do more with less, and it's getting really, really hard to kind of measure sort of everything. Yeah, how do you kind of measure that or manage that pressure?
And it is a significant pressure. And unfortunately, the setup of how the CMO CFO relationship, or any level of the marketing function and finance function, and how they deal with each other, it has been set up in a way that they wait until they're in a situation, a group setting, the leadership team meeting, and it's this, okay, justify yourself. And that's how it is presented and asked. And immediately it becomes a offense defense type situation. For me, it's too late then. I'm a big believer in having that prepared conversation with the CFO or your finance counterpart. So going in as a united front, because the reality of a CFO, what are they looking for? What they're actually thinking about is, it's going to be me and the CEO at the boardroom table or sitting in front of investors. So we're going to have to be the ones to justify any of these numbers, forecasts, cost base, all of this spend. Please, they're basically telling you, please arm me with the evidence to be able to present a credible front. That's what they're asking to do. But the setting that we're faced with tends to be this, like I said, more offense, defense, and we're having to justify it. But when you put the CFO's hat on from that perspective, you say, okay, they're needing to also justify it. So that means we're on the same team. So why don't, before we have that leadership team meeting, the two of us have a sit down and have a chat about it? And I know that sounds really obvious, but marketers and financiers do not do it. They don't do it. I know from asking many peers about it. It's always that confrontation in a meeting. So what does that mean? We often forget, or maybe we don't know as marketers, that the talent that CFOs and finance people have is filled with what their day job is about, which is finding the numbers, finding how to measure numbers, how to forecast, how to predict, how to put a risk assessment on it, how to project and scenario plan. They do that for the entire business. So they're the obvious ones to then lean on as experts in that area to maybe come up with, how are we as this particular business, how are we as a team going to find the numbers that make sense, the numbers that are measurable, and the ones that we know that are important but are not necessarily so easy to measure. Because the moment you have that in cahoots conversation with your finance person, it's an absolute game changer. So that's definitely where I'd start, Lucy, for sure.
I love that actually, because it's you're so right what you said at the start. Like you do, I think we do, like marketers do automatically go on the kind of the defensive, right? It's we think that we're in that kind of like fire line of having to sort of justify. Whereas I think yeah, you're right. Just maybe having that sit down conversation with them first and saying, look, help me help you, and vice versa. Let's
And
help each other.
exactly, and make it even more practical. So what does that look like in terms of conversation? Say, okay, here is the numbers I'm able to access really, really easily. Here are the things that are a little bit more intangible, and I just can't solve the gap for how do we put meat on this bone to make it a really credible thing. I know it's an important channel or an important strategy, but we don't seem to be able to access the data. Can we talk this out together? And you'll be surprised the insights that they will come up to and the ideas they will come up with to be able to provide a way to find that data. And or that person or you both together go away and try and look for ways to measure it more tangibly. And actually you both come back with the realization of, oh no, I can't. This is just going to have to be one of these vaguer areas. But let's know that that's the truth, and let's create a narrative and a story around it so that when we are in front of the board and investors, there is validity to what we're saying.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So that having that sort of sit down conversation then, I mean, is that kind of in your experience, like how some of the CFOs or the finance leaders that you've worked with then, that's worked really well for you?
Yeah, but I go as far as usually if I am starting a role, I'll have big part of the decision I would have made on taking that role will be based on the relationship I had with the CFO during the interview process. If
Oh,
there's someone I think that I can have that very, okay, let's figure this out together approach, I'm all in. So, and it's not about them being a CFO, it's actually, do they have an approach to working that will allow for that kind of relationship between a CFO and a CMO? If they don't, you're probably going to be, rolling a big stone uphill. So that's definitely approach. But look, that's not everybody has the luxury of that. But look, bring it back to ego. If you tell somebody you're asking them, as you just put it, for help with something, it's flips the switch completely. And look, I would say that to not just the CMOs dealing with CFOs. If you're a senior marketing manager, have the same conversation with your counterpart, senior finance manager. Don't wait until you're at the CMO level to have that collab type conversation. Do it throughout your career at all levels, and it'll change the game for you.
yeah, that's amazing advice. I absolutely love that. If there's anybody out there that actually sort of doesn't have that relationship with the kind of finance leaders within the organization, and maybe they do have the experience that it is a kind of seen as a cost center, is there a way to kind of flip that narrative? So you're sort of saying like start it, work that relationship right from the start, which I love. If there are people out there that don't have that luxury yet, they're kind of in their career already, or they're in that position already, can they work with the finance leaders to kind of turn it round, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of marketers, and I'd argue maybe a lot of finance people, are not familiar with the accounting ISO standard 10668, I think it is, which is all around brand valuation.
I'm
It
not.
is literally the the epicenter of where it all comes to task for finance people and marketing people. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to build brands, and brands that have value, because ultimately what we're either trying to, on the road to an IPO, to some kind of liquidity event, some kind of sale, or we want to just benefit from all the things that a very strong brand gives us, which is access to the talent market, reduced costs, reduced marketing costs for acquiring customers, all of those things. So I would actually have a frank conversation and say, okay, if this is a debate that's always going on, set up a meeting with those who need to be in it, your finance people, your CEO, all of those, and say, guys, I really need to understand what our finance and accounting approach is to, well, I would do this with the finance person first, right? Because you don't want to throw them under the bus. But ask the question, what is the company's policy and methodology towards a brand valuation? Because if you understand that as a marketer, then you know where to focus your attention in terms of measurement. So what does that look like? There's three approaches within that methodology to value a brand. There's the cost approach, there is the market approach, and there is the income approach. So the cost approach is it is what it says in the tin. It's how much have we spent to create the brand, and how much would it cost to replace or reproduce that brand. That's one method of it. So if that's going to be the method that your CFO uses, then you being able to provide those measurements are going to be really important. The market approach then is more around comparing your brand to similar brands that have been sold or have been licensed or have been traded. Now, generally, you don't, as the marketer, you won't be doing this by yourself. You'll absolutely have to be working with the finance team to get these kind of numbers or to understand what it is. So it really forces that collaboration. The third one then is the income approach. So this is all about future economic benefits, like cash flows, for instance, that the brand is expected to generate. And this method usually brings in something called the royalty relief method. So most sectors have a percentage bandwidth for the royalty relief method. In basic terms, what it means is if you were to license somebody's brand, how much would it cost you? Right. And you apply that method to your own brand. Now, I know there's probably going to be a lot of marketers listening to me going, what the hell is all this stuff? This is really just like finance next level. I don't understand it. But the irony is, this is the stuff that finance people get frustrated that marketing people don't understand, because it is our world. But we don't, anywhere I studied marketing, this was never taught to me. And I'll tell you why I came across it. I came across it because I've been in startups and scale ups. So the story has always been about unicorn valuation. And I was like, right, how do I, as a CMO, what's my contribution to the big valuation? So I went searching. So actually, there's a company that I'd highly recommend your listeners to go to. They're called Brand Finance.
Okay.
Obvious combination. And they talk about all of these. They're one of few accounting firms that are ISO qualified under that particular standard to value brands. You learn so much by looking at that. So to go back to your question around speaking the CFO language, that's the kind of stuff. Understanding that kind of stuff really helps in your conversation. So back to your CFO, which one of those methods are we using to value our brand? I can guarantee you, unless you're working in a really, really big company, most regular size companies, let's call them, probably have not even thought about that. Their senior finance person, it's not even on their radar. But all of a sudden, if you put it on their radar, you're putting the ball back in their court to say, guys, this isn't just marketing's job to figure this stuff out. This is absolutely the two of us together. If we haven't got a policy in place about which approach we're leaning into, then let's decide it together. And then off the back of that are going to be the measurements that we need to report on that. And we agree them together. And because we're agreeing them together, we can both very transparently see the ones that we are easily able to get the metrics for because our marketing stack allows that, versus the things that aren't so easy to get. So what are things that are difficult to get? Brand awareness, brand sentiment, all of those, intangibles. The reality is they are all very feasible to measure. The problem is it's expensive and time consuming.
Mhm.
But when you lay that out to your finance person and say, we can measure this stuff, we actually can, because the likes of a brand finance, this is what they do. But are these measurements important enough for you, CFO person, that we are willing as a business to pay, and here's a sample of cost to do this measurement because we can't do it internally? Or now that you know this, are they suddenly dropping down in importance for you in terms of reporting? And it just creates a really frank conversation. You'd be surprised how many of these things all of a sudden there's a, okay, maybe we'll just push those ones to the side. And when we can afford to do those big, customer survey of 100,000 people, when we can afford to do that, we'll do that. But for right now, we can't. So we're just going to have to accept as a business that some of these numbers are not measurable for us. So that's how I would go about it.
I love this. I love this. And I mean, the title of this, obviously, this chat that we wanted to have was about kind of like speaking their language. And this is you're just hitting kind of the nail on the head, really. It's, we kind of want to go to them with or your natural instinct is to want to go to them with the answers in our language, which is here are all the kind of marketing things that we can measure. Take your pick. What do you want? But that's not their language, that's our language, right? If you turn it on its head, like what you're saying is actually, well, let's work out together what it is that we want to what problem that we're trying to solve, or what goal that we're looking towards, whether that's a short-term goal or it is the big end goal. And then let's work backwards from that. And then I can kind of start to add my expertise in there, which is here's all the sort of marketing things that we can and can't measure and what they mean. And the finance person is adding their things on how we can attribute those measurements to the finance related goals, right?
Spot
It's
on. That is
yeah,
exactly it.
yeah.
And actually, you've even that word language, we use a lot of the different terminologies, but we speak the same language. We talk about return on ad spend, return on investment, like all of these things are so similar. It's incredible. But what's better than trying to speak the same language is trying to understand the same story. I think is much more important. And look, this is what we're excellent at, is that storytelling. So, what is the storytelling? Storytelling could be analogies, for instance, and you might have a CFO or a leadership team that really appreciate a really good analogy if they're just really not understanding that tangible, intangible measurement thing. So I know time is running, but a perfect example is the the paid search versus organic search argument. Like the frustration of trying to explain that. So one of the analogies I use for that is is roses. So I say to them, paid search is like buying a bunch of really expensive long stem roses. You can have them immediately. You know what you're paying, you know how many roses you're getting, and problem is they'll die within a few days. So you still need to keep going back to that florist to replenish those very expensive roses if you always want them in your house or in your vicinity. Organic then is like buying rose seeds, which are incredibly cheap. Planting them, watering them, nurturing them. It'll take a long time for them to produce roses, but once they do, then they're forever. And that's just an example of a basic analogy, but how something like that lands with your wider team is the storytelling approach. The second version of it then is the one that we always love, is trying to convince leadership teams and your CFO that buyers don't follow a linear line. along the funnel of, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom funnel, buy. And the moment you story tell back to them their own experience of, to the chief people officer, tell me about the experience, or let's talk through the experience that you had buying that latest intranet for the employee comms. CFO, that latest accounts payable package that you had the team implement. Let's talk through the journey you went, and flip them out of their CFO, CPO situation and put them into the buyer's realm. And then they'll realize how schizophrenic they were in terms of how they went and all the different decision makers that were involved and the influencers and all of that. And it's storytelling. So I definitely would emphasize the language bit. It isn't necessarily about how do I talk about ISO standard 10668 and methodology and evaluation. It isn't just about that, but that helps. It is about the storytelling. And I think we have no excuse as marketers, because that's our secret sauce, is storytelling. And I think we can apply it very well to our finance peers.
So true. That's so true. You've just got me thinking actually about a conversation I remember having as well. I think one of the ways that I remember building up the relationship with the finance department was the finance department were doing their presentations at the all company meetings. And it was literally just putting up the numbers and, EBITDA and all of these words and everything were just coming out. And there was very little kind of interaction, and we were still getting feedback that people really didn't understand the numbers every month. And I remember sitting down with the finance department and saying, right, okay, well, let's think about a story around this, very much the kind of similar one that you just said. And actually, that put me in the good books of this particular finance leader, because suddenly they told this story, and it was a bit of a aha sort of moment on, one of the all company calls, where everybody suddenly were asking questions. They were putting up, oh, okay, well, if you did go into this cake shop and buy these cakes, then and that would that mean that? And but it was clicking into place for
Genius.
everyone.
I'm stealing that one. That's super, because I've seen that. I've been on those big calls, and I've watched the faces and them glaze over and come away none the wiser.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. That's really, really good takeaway, actually. So what we touched upon there, like some of those like you say, the kind of intangible things like the brand awareness and those sorts of things. What is your sort of go-to strategy for having those awkward conversations around ROI and things like content creation or brand awareness? Like, how do you manage to kind of get around that?
To be honest, Lucy, it's a combination of what we had just talked about. It's the unpacking of what currently is measurable and unmeasurable, and walking through those things with the CFO in a discovery format. I think that's always a good way to formulate it, because there's been plenty of times I've either worked in businesses or advised businesses whose data stack, whose MarTech stack just wasn't up to scratch, and they weren't going to have the budget to be able to have all singing, all dancing. So then it was just going to have to be a big straight down the line. Okay, we're just going to have to accept that we're not going to be able to box at the same level that these deep pocket businesses are, that can measure everything. We are going to be blind in some areas, but you know what? Every other function in this business has their blind spots as well, because that's the reality of the size of company we're at. So let's not just focus in on the marketing being the big blind spot and we don't know what we're doing or where it's been investing. Let's actually, again, have a session with all the peers, and let's share our blind spots and ideate and discover how we might be able to help each other to plug some of them. And there might be some solutions that'll come up, but more importantly, there'll be education around the table around what the blind spots are, and an appreciation and an acceptance and a respect for it. And what that does then is creates an empathy and understanding, so that you no longer have these attacking offense and defense type leadership meetings, or why aren't you doing this, tell us this, prove this. It's coming from then a different direction, because the light always shines on marketing as being the more intangible, or aren't able to prove our value. But while that's happening, it's shining the light, taking the light away from the other functions who are actually having the very same problems, but there's an acceptance that's happened there. And oftentimes the reason the acceptance has happened there is because there's been a discovery at somewhere along the line. There's an understanding or a discovery. And I do think marketers do things in silos a lot more than other. See, the CEO, the operations tend to be much more cross-functional in terms of how they operate and getting buy-in of the decisions they're making along the way, and what their blind spots are and not are. And I do think a lot of the other functions are quite similar, whereas marketing, we tend to try and just sort it out ourselves, and then get frustrated when the other functions don't understand because they haven't gone along the journey with us. So I definitely think we can get better at that.
I know we're talking about the kind of the CFO relationship, but you just kind of got me thinking about that. Like, we're talking about the CFO relationship, but then I wonder where the what your thoughts are around where the sales leader as well comes into that conversation. And I tell you where I'm going, my head's going with this, right? So I think in a lot of organizations I've seen, or a lot of other marketing leaders that I've spoken to, they kind of sit, like you say, the marketing kind of sits in their silos, and they're not, and all of the revenue is kind of being attributed and is easily traceable or attributable back to the sales. But then the marketing kind of can't say, okay, well, I've had a part of that. Do you know what I mean? I'm probably not explaining myself very well, but
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
you're just
everybody
aligning
needs
yourself with,
to, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, stand that pain. And honestly, every company I've joined as CMO, or every company that I have advised, that has always been the number one thing that I end up going in and fixing. And it transforms. And it's the exact same approach with the, okay, senior sales leader who's my counterpart. Let's sit down and I want your insights or your thoughts on this. Is there anything you see that I'm not seeing here in terms of enabling you guys to get those leads and convert those leads? Can share some of your anecdotal stuff. Finding that, again, it's a bit of an ego thing and an appreciation thing. You're appreciating that these guys and girls have things to contribute to the conversation about figuring that out. So don't try and figure it out yourself on your own marketing person and then go to the salesperson and say, I have a solution how we can work together. Go sit with them and say, okay, how do we figure out to work together? And here are some of the gaps and challenges I'm having. Is there anything here you can see that I'm missing? And they'll either have an idea, or either they'll say, oh my God, I didn't realize that was so difficult to figure out. And then the empathy comes in immediately. And then that opens the space then to get into solution mode. I mean, conversations aren't as easy. I'm making it sound really easy. Sometimes there's pushback, or, there isn't motivation by the person on the other side to even sit down and have that kind of conversation. So it can be an element of warming up and creating rapport that's not the marketing versus finance. It's the people rapport, or the marketing versus sales. It's build up that rapport at a people level first, and then that allows and builds the trust to be able to say, okay, let's have an honest conversation about what we both don't know, and how do we figure it out together to answer it. Because you know what, it's you and me against the CEO, because the CEO is looking at both of us for these answers. So
That's the thing. I think, again, we automatically kind of assume that we need to kind of go on the defense, mode. But actually, you're right. Like the sales leaders are sitting there having exactly the same thoughts that we are. And if you like, I've had this situation where there was a company that I worked for a while back, where it was kind of more like marketing were like influence. They weren't sort of the lead generators per se, but actually being able to, I dug through the kind of the CRM and some of the marketing campaigns that we were doing, and I was finding these particular trends. Like, there was one particular product brochure, for example, that all of the leads that were in, all of the deals that were in the pipeline were downloading. So it wasn't that was the source of those leads or the source of those like sales opportunities. It was just a trend that we were seeing, that all of the leads were doing this one particular thing or looking at this particular marketing asset. So I was like, there's something in this, right? So I went to the salesperson and kind of sat down with them and said, look, I'm kind of seeing this trend. Everyone loves this particular like brochure. Like there's something that we could do with this, right? We need to communicate this particular point more and that. But the great thing was that it was telling them something that they don't know and like helping them, in their role. So suddenly they were like really interested. You weren't just sitting down with a blank page and saying, how can marketing help you? It's like, hey, look, I found this thing. I don't quite know, not sure it's interesting enough, but can we work on it?
Love that. And that's basically of reciprocation. It's so human. And look, if I was to give a last piece of advice where, how do you have that relationship with your finance person, your counterpart or team, if it's not as easy, if you're feeling intimidated by it, or maybe that people rapport bit isn't there, I would highly recommend following some finance people on LinkedIn, because we're all following other marketers and our customers and all of that. If you want to get a bit of an insight into the pain and frustration that finance people are feeling so that you can empathize with them a bit more to understand them, follow a few of them that are in your competitors. Follow the CFO or the head of finance or whatever at your competitors. See what they're talking about, what's important to them, because the chances are what's important to them is also the same thing that's really important to your CFO or head of finance, because they're dealing with the same issues. And once you can understand that, that puts you in a really powerful position then to heavily empathize with that person, first of all, but also create a doorway in and an understanding. Because if they feel you understand them, they're more likely to want to invest in wanting to understand you. But also, don't be afraid to reach out to a counterpart, not with your competitors now, but a finance person in maybe a neighboring sector, and say, look, I've been following you for a little while. Any chance I could have a half an hour call? I would love to pick your brain on you as a CFO. What are your thoughts on valuing brands? Or what are your thoughts on working, whatever it might be? And just have a really objective conversation and learn a lot. And that again equips you and arms you to have a conversation with your team in-house then. So there's lots of ways to learn and bridge the gap.
Yeah, and I know the last time we spoke, actually, like you really kind of inspired me because you said that you took that even like one step further, and you actually done a course or some studying around the kind of the finance, and so that you could understand sort of a little bit more.
Yeah, I had my academic background. I had done my undergrad in finance and accounting, but didn't go down that route. But I did later on become a qualified um chartered management accountant. Now I've zero intentions of actually practicing or moving into that function, but and I don't think anybody needs to go as far as to become a chartered accountant, right? You don't need to go that far to understand that stuff. There are lots of other different courses you can do that will just open your mind to, wow, okay, this marketers, I don't think marketers appreciate actually how analytical and their roles are. Even the most creative people, I think they'll surprise themselves how much of the finance side of things resonates. And exposing yourself to that kind of information and content would actually give you, a lot of marketers, a big boost in confidence, because they'll be like, oh, this actually is more familiar to me than I realize. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for anybody to go as far as having to get that level of qualification. There was other reasons I wanted to do that, more for I didn't do it 20 years ago, so I'm going to get it done now, kind of a thing. But it definitely did sharpen my tools when it came to having those conversations and seeking out things like brand finance and how do you actually go about valuing brands, and what do I need to know as a marketer to help with that brand valuation. If you get curious about that, you will learn a lot, and it lifts the mist of unknowing.
I like what you just said, though. It kind of gives you like, it feels like it gives you a little bit of confidence. And I think, that will come across as sort of as part of the conversation with the CFO. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Before you go, I have a little bit of a something to spring on you. So one of the things that I'm doing with this podcast is I'm asking people on LinkedIn, on my network on LinkedIn, to give me a question that they would want to ask a marketing leader. And I'm asking that question to my podcast guests. So I'm sorry to spring this on you, but I have a question for you. So the question is, so the question's around kind of the evolution of the job roles, all of these new kind of like job roles that we're seeing coming up, and particularly the roles like kind of head of growth or chief growth officer and chief strategy officer, head of strategy. How do you see them kind of connecting, or what's the link with marketing with those roles?
It's so timely that you should ask that question, or that that person should ask that question, because today I learned something on LinkedIn around the head of growth or chief growth officer role. So this is a very local, global thing. So apparently in the UK, Ireland, a head of growth or chief growth officer role is very much a marketing role. Whereas in the States, that role is actually considered to sit at the center of a number of different functions: marketing, product, sales, probably customer success. So that's a very different type of role for that reason. And actually, to then link into the strategy side, I actually see that US version of the growth role being much more around strategy, because it is business strategy and it's pulling in all of those go to market and revenue and customer value type functions, and kind of saying, right, how do we orchestrate them all to really bolster the business strategy? Whereas growth over our side of the pond, it's more marketing related. So it's more about marketing strategy and how that feeds in. So now that was something new that I learned myself today, and it has made me look at the people in those roles and the companies that are applying growth roles to their companies. It tells me a lot about what their business strategy is, which I never would have spotted the same way before, and ultimately says a lot about their strategy, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's so interesting. It makes me think about the whole like chief revenue officer. I mean that's we could do another podcast on that. Don't even get me started on that. But I think it sounds very similar where you've got all of the revenue driving kind of functions across the business all kind of coming together, which I see a huge kind of value in. But it always sort of feels a little bit like not trying to play the victim, but almost like marketing's kind of the poor child amongst that, where I think we kind of probably out of all of them sit across most kind of horizontal across all of them. But yeah, anyway, like I say, definitely another podcast. We should do that. Anyway, thank you so much, Andrea. It's been so
Great.
interesting. I've learned so much. Honestly, I really wanted to like scribble down notes. I'm definitely going to have to play this back and listen myself and take a few things down. So thank you very much. Bye bye.